Welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if you're new. Today, we're talking about the board interview and how to best handle it. Let's discuss. Listen, if you're new or if you've been seeing these videos for a while and you haven't used those GIFs down in the description, go ahead and click on the description, open it up. We have 2 free GIFs down there. Both of them are my gift to you. One of them is the Getting Started workshop. It's going to walk you through each phase of the hiring process. There's some hidden bonuses in there so you can help practice and advance your hiring process. Additionally, if you have something specific to you, and you're really ready to move forward with the hiring process and you have some questions, maybe you have some hurdles that you need to discuss, jump on a free coaching call with me. I'll be glad to sit down and help you best way I can. Both of those in the description, just open it up. They're my gift to you. Now, the board hiring process or the board hiring phase, the board interview. The big thing that you need to understand, and I've discussed this in other videos, is you may not know what type of board you're going to get. Are you going to have a 3-panel board? Are you going to have a 5-panel board? Are you going to have a board interview followed by a chief's interview or an ASAC interview? There's a lot that go into the typical board interviews or the interviews in general. And of course, you have your psych interview and your poly interview and even your med interview. One thing that you really need to understand is anytime you're going into this board interview is you need to be confident in who you are as a person to best convey yourself. Any coaching member that I've ever worked with, whether their department that they're applying to requires a resume or not, I make them do a resume. Why? Because if you can't fill out who you are and articulate yourself on a piece of paper with all the time in the world and no one on top of you asking you questions or drilling you, then you'll never be able to do that in a board interview or a psych interview or any other type of interview, but especially during a board interview where you have all these different people determining whether or not they want to make you a conditional offer or push you through in the process. So a resume allows you to convey yourself in a short but brief and concise aspect to prepare. So if you fill out a resume and you read that resume and you know your resume verbatim, I'm not talking about scripted where you answer scripted and it comes across very scripted. Obviously, they want to see passion, compassion, and honesty in your answers when you're given a board interview. But your resume is a condensed version of who you are and what you've done so far professionally in your life. And a lot of times, or educationally, a lot of times the questions you're going to be asked on the board interview pertain to that, right? They're going to pertain to what you've done professionally in your life. If I ask you the question, tell me about yourself. Well, where are you going to start? If you're young, right? If you're in college, and I'll break this down for each aspect. If you're in college or you're just graduating college and you haven't done much work in the workforce, then you're going to go back a little bit farther. You might, well, I was raised in this state, and then after this state, I graduated from this high school. I got accepted to this school or this college or university for criminal justice or whatever your major is. And throughout that time, I've worked in this capacity, or I volunteered in this capacity, or interned in this capacity. I've also been on these different programs or college teams for legal studies, whatever it is. That's how you're going to articulate yourself, right? If you have a little bit more experience than that, right, you're going to say, oh, well, I graduated from this high school. I attended this college. I graduated with cum laude from this college with a focus in criminal justice. After I graduated that college, I worked at this location, XYZ. I gained a lot of valuable experience here. I transferred at that point from there to here, where I've continued to grow into my opportunities and experience. And I've learned valuable skills such as XYZ. Right? It just flows, right? And I'm plug and playing common terms in here. It just flows because I can literally picture my resume in my head because it's a chronological order of who and what I've done professionally, right? My resume is professional and academics. It's not necessarily, it doesn't sit there and say, hey, I'm a father and a husband and all these other things, but it does go along the lines and say, hey, this is what I am. This is what I've done professionally. For me, it would be a little bit different. It would say, hey, I graduated high school. At this point in time, I enlisted in the United States Navy. I went through these training programs, ultimately ending my career with an honorable discharge with multiple service awards. From there, I became a law enforcement officer with the National Park Service as their backcountry law enforcement officer. After that, I transferred up to Washington, D.C., where there I worked as a law enforcement officer in every aspect, all the way from bike patrol, uniform patrol, undercover, protection detail for presidential appointees, officer in charge of a SWAT team, all these different things, right? All these different aspects that I can add to my resume. And I can just picture my resume as I go down. And that's how I explain myself to that question in a board interview. Tell us about yourself, right? I could go the emotional route and say, oh, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I have a beautiful little girl. They mean the world to me. You know, my family means the world to me. I have multiple siblings. I could go that route, but that's not really the route that an employer is looking for. You can touch on those aspects and say, oh, you know, I do everything for my family, for my wife and my little girl. But for the most part, they're looking for more professional focused conversation there. And that's just one question. And how did I answer that question? I went right down the resume. All right, now I say, let's get a question. Tell me about a time where you had to deal with conflict. All right, let me go through my resume again. Okay, what have I done in my resume? Do I want to do military? Do I want to do law enforcement as a backcountry ranger? Right? Do I want to do law enforcement in DC, whether that's uniform, bike patrol, undercover, you know, supervisor, you know, it doesn't matter. Whatever one I can pick from, I just look through my resume mentally in my head and say, where do I want to draw? Okay, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult situation. All right. When I was first working as a law enforcement officer, I was a backcountry ranger. At that point in time, I had to deal with a lot of issues by myself. One of those issues were that I ran into a DUI issue in the backcountry with someone on a boat. I was solo officer. These individuals had crashed their boat because they were intoxicated. At that point in time, I was a few miles back where I had to detain these individuals. I was by myself. I had to detain 2 individuals that were intoxicated. And I also had to address that they were under arrest while I was multiple miles in the backcountry. I handled the situation by reaching out via radio to a supervisor and coordinated a water pickup to go and process the arrest of the driving individual, and then also to allow the other individual to get home safely, where they were in a compromised position. They were both drunk, they were stranded, and they were in a dangerous situation in the backcountry of a national park in the mountainous and dangerous terrain with no provisions. That's a tough situation, right? I can articulate that by going through my resume and saying, hey, which one okay, let me draw. Because this is so early in the interview, let me draw on one of my oldest skills, oldest memories. There we go, oldest memories. And I just pull that out. That way, as I progress through the interview, I can keep using other analogies or other situations as I get up to current times. Right? I mean, I could have went back to the military, but that's a whole different aspect. I have law enforcement experience, so I would clearly articulate law enforcement experience. If you had security experience, you'd articulate security experience. If you had military experience, you'd articulate that next. If you have intern experience, you'd articulate that, or vice versa. If you only had education, that's what you would use as your experience. And that's how you prepare for the board interview, right? You draw on what you know, but you can't do anything unless you have that figured out first. And you can't figure it out until you sit down and write it down, right? And then once you write it down, work it through, make it work. You know, as I said, all my coaching members, every single one of them, submit me a resume first. They have to submit me a resume. That way I can see how they see themselves and how they articulate themselves. The number one reason people get disqualified or removed from the process is because they cannot articulate situations or themselves properly. And then they get into a situation where they're talking with a background investigator, a board interview, poly or psych or anything along those lines. And they say the wrong thing and they just get in their own way and they create a hurdle that never needed to be there. And they trip while they're running that race and they just don't make it to the finish line, or they just don't make it to the finish line enough and someone else gets the slot or the billet. And it all starts with the first thing you do, which is have a resume and tailor that resume. You're allowed to have more than one resume, right? So have a law enforcement resume And that's going to help with your board interview, right? Every single time I get those questions, I'm looking at my resume mentally. And it helps distract me from feeling nervous, right? I'm sitting down, I have 3 to 6 people in front of me, maybe the chief's in the back, or there's an HR representative in the back, and they're judging the process. Maybe I have a couple detectives or whatever, and they're sitting here and they're just pelting me with questions, and I'm dressed professionally. My hands are on the table, right? I'm trying not to fidget or move back and forth. These are all things you don't want to do during your board interview. And they say, Frank, tell us a time, or Mr. McGaha, tell us a time that you had to deal with this situation, or how would you handle the scenario in this situation? And I sit here and I pause for a second, catch my breath. I'm thinking, a 1 second pause. One way I would handle this situation would be utilizing some experience that I had in the past with a similar situation where XYZ occurred. I then followed procedure, policy, and law, and I completed it XYZ. I radioed for backup. I notified a supervisor, said, hey, I'm going to need an additional person out here to assist with this. And then just keep going, right? You just kind of keep going with I don't want to sit out here and tell another scenario, but I just keep going with the whole situation that I had. I said I would follow those same procedures and hopefully still have good mentors or supervisors or experience to draw on if I run into an issue that I can't solve, or a piece of information that I don't know how to handle. Right? I don't have to sit here and say, because I have all this experience, I know how to handle it perfectly. One of the best resources you have out there is a supervisor or is a mentor, right? And you can always say, hey, I wouldn't be above calling my supervisor and asking for guidance. There's nothing wrong with that. That's why they're there. That's the whole purpose of them being there if you run into a situation that you can't handle by yourself. So saying that in a board interview is always a good mark. And I always gave higher points for someone that just came out and said, hey, and at the end of the day, if I didn't know how to handle the situation, I'd contact a supervisor and have them guide me through it while I still perform all the functions, right? Not say I'd pass it off, but they'd still perform the functions. And then they could just have a supervisor guide them through the process. Okay. When I did that, right, when the question got asked of me, as I was thinking about it, as I was going through my resume, hey, which situation do I want to draw on? And that's exactly what I did. I actually had a perfect situation, but I didn't want to go into a whole long story again for sake of time. I thought about a perfect story for the situation. I actually had a question in my head, thought about an answer for it, and it all took 2 seconds. And, if we sit here 2 seconds while you're sitting in that chair and you think you're not saying anything, 2 seconds seems like a lifetime and you think it's an awkward silence. It's not, because they're just waiting for you to collect your thoughts. You should always collect your thoughts first in a board interview or any interview, especially for a board interview. Collect your thoughts first, apply a situation or experience that you had to it, and then answer the question. And if you can draw on experience, add that experience into it. Don't be cocky about it. Oh yeah, I had the same situation when I was working with X department, so I know exactly how to handle it. No, that's cocky. Don't do that. That's not you, right? That is not you. You are a humble professional. And you've heard me say this before, be a humble professional. Always be a humble professional, because that way you're never going to get in trouble when you're a law enforcement officer. All right. Go through. I keep getting sidetracked. You go through, right? You take that breath. As you're taking that breath, you're thinking through your head, okay, what's my resume say? Bam, this is a perfect example and experience I have to answer this question. Go ahead, draw on that. But you know exactly what you say for the cliff notes because you have it documented on your resume. You know exactly what happened because it's in your memory and it made enough of an impact to jump out at you in this scenario. I hope this helps. Like I said, this is the part that I would really always start with when it comes to a board interview, is having your resume developed first, because if you can answer things off of your resume, I cannot tell you how many times I've sat in front of a board and they said, Frank or Mr. McGaha or whatever, I see here it says on your resume that you have experience in XYZ. Can you explain to me where you got this experience or where you gained it or an example of this experience? And then I put it on my resume. So I better have an actual, experience to back up why I said, hey, I'm considered an expert in this level for any of you that ever filled out USA Jobs, right? The tier that it goes. But I'm considered an expert in this level. Well, hey, yeah, I'm considered an expert in this level because I'm an instructor and I've taught multiple law enforcement officers about XYZ, right? More detail, but you understand. I can do that. And it starts with the resume. Okay. I hope this helps. As I said before, listen, if you want to kick this off and you want to get started, go ahead and sign up for the Getting Started workshop. It's a quick workshop. It's going to walk you through. There's definitely some hidden bonuses in there that you're going to love, and it's going to help start your way through the process, right? It's going to help get you into that preparation stage, get you to understand what you have coming in front of you, because it is a lengthy process and it can be a difficult process if you make it that way. Other than that, you're really the only person that can get in your own way. If you have something more specific and you're ready to move forward right now, jump on a free coaching call with me. I will give you the best guidance I can. Both of these are my gift to you. They don't cost you a single thing. I'm happy to help as best I can. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.